The story I'm going to tell you about tonight, I think, is the most important story in the world, or one of the most important stories in the world going on right now that almost nobody knows about. So you are going to leave here tonight knowing this information, which is amazing stuff, as you will see as it unfolds. So sit back, enjoy, and we'll get started now in a very unlikely place. And that is, as you just saw, Mexico. It starts in about 1930. Around 1930, a Mexican-American family, they had left a village about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, about right here, near what's called the Copper Canyon area of Mexico, which is like the Grand Canyon of the United States. I know you all have an image of that in your mind. And they had moved up to El Paso, Texas, which sits right here opposite the border from Ciudad Juarez. And in El Paso, Texas, they formed a life. They had children. They became citizens, and they were then able to go back and forth across the border in 1930 without a problem. So they took their kids down to the village for the first time, and one of their children was a teenage girl, 13, 14, 15 years old. She couldn't remember later in life exactly how old she was, or the exact year, but in the range of 1930. When the family got there to the village and they were introduced and being shown around and told, they instructed on how to deal with down there, they were told not to go in any of the caves or mine tunnels that were near the area, near the village, because that was dangerous and it was taboo and forbidden, and just don't do it. And being a good red-blooded American teenager, the first opportunity she got, she snuck off with a basket saying she was going to pick berries and fruits, and she wanted to do some exploring. She went way away from the village, just looking around, and found a mine tunnel. And in that mine tunnel, she found, it was in an area like this. I'm sorry, I should have said, this is the kind of area that we're talking about. And she found a mine tunnel like this. Now, this is one that people are living in, but I have it here because I can't find one that looks like it should accept this. Just imagine all this gone, and she finds a place like this, and she goes in exploring. Remember, the difference in a mine tunnel is that it's relatively straight, caves all over the place. So she knew the difference. She knew what she was in. And so as she walked in, she found about, 50 or so feet in, where she could still see, she found a skeleton, a human skeleton lying on its back. Now, she was from El Paso, Texas, a very dry area where when animals die, their bones don't necessarily break down. They just bleach white, and you see a lot. She had seen a lot of skeletons, wasn't intimidated, and in her biology classes in high school, junior high, whatever she was, junior high, they used to have or still do, I think, skeleton on a pole. Maybe some of you guys have that, but she wasn't completely freaked out or anything like that. She walked up close to see it, knew what it was, and then she saw, amazingly enough, that there was a pile of dirt beside it, which looked a lot like a grave. And extending out of that grave was a hand, what she called a skeletal, misshapen hand. And that hand, if you can believe I found a picture to represent it, was wrapped around, out of the dirt, wrapped around the upper arm bone of the human lying on its back. Well, without question, she was looking at a scene, although she didn't know it, but she was looking at a scene in which somebody in the grave had died. The person lying beside it had buried that individual, had left the hand to stick out of the dirt, and then had laid down and wrapped it around her own arm and killed herself, committed suicide. It's a very dramatic, very romantic, whatever you want to call it, but it's an interesting scenario that she found. And as she looked at it, she noticed that the dirt didn't look compacted. It looked very fresh, very clumped up, which it would be in a mine tunnel. No rain to compact the soil, nothing. So maybe I can scrape that open, she said. So she did with her hands, just her bare hands, and sure enough, it revealed a whole skeleton, which she called misshapen. So we've got a misshapen hand, misshapen skeleton. And she decided to take them both. Why not? Maybe she could donate them to her school. It would be cool. What a neat thing to do. And so that's what she did. She piled the bones into that big basket, but without a plan for really how to sneak them all back to the States without anybody knowing in her family, because she had been forbidden to do what she had done. So she didn't know how to handle it, and she thought, I need to buy some time. I need to buy some time. So she was walking back to the village. She saw a ravine like this, and she noticed that, there was a tree, and up under it was an opening carved out where the roots were, but it was open up under the tree roots. Perfect hiding place. She jammed the bones all up in there with the plan of figuring it out in a few days, and then coming back and executing whatever plan she could come up with. So that night, a torrential rain came and lasted for 2 days. Probably a hurricane passing over that part of Mexico. And so as she was able to go out on the third day to go look at her hiding place, she got there and she found why it was a ravine and why the roots had been carved out. The water had filled up, as it does in those flash flood gullies, and washed all the bones away. Just gone. Poof. Gone. All. And it was like, oh, what a disaster. So she went walking down to see if anything, she might find something down the way, and sure enough, in some bushes she found the 2 skulls. Minus the jawbones, of course, because your jawbone is not attached to your skull. But they had suffered some damage in the tumble. The clearly human one had lost its left zygomatic arch, and the misshapen one had lost the lower part of its face, both of its zygomatic arches, much of its nose, but separated from it was its upper right maxilla, this part right in here, under here. So she had the 2 craniums, the upper maxilla. She was happy to have them. She took those, stopped looking right there, and that was it. She knew she could sneak those in, and she did. When she did that, she took them back to the States, got them in, no problem, hid them. When she grew up enough, she just owned that she had them. They were souvenirs. In her mind, she had collected 2 souvenirs, one of which was a normal human skull, and the other one she assumed was a deformed human because it looked human-like. And she kept them in that box in her garage for the whole of her life until the early 90s, some 60 years later, when she found out that she was terminal and was going to die. And by then she had married a man who was a U.S. Customs Service agent. And he was never really that comfortable with the 2 skulls in the box in the garage. And she knew that. So as she knew she was dying, as you would do a beloved pet or something like that, she tried to find a good home for him. So she asked a couple of friends of hers if they would keep them for her, and they agreed to do that. What are you going to say to a dying person? But he, the male of that couple, was an FBI agent. And he wasn't that excited about them either. That couple kept them for 5 years, which they considered a decent interval. And then they began to look for somebody to take them over. They had a younger couple, ironically named Ray and Melanie Young. And Ray and Melanie, this is all these people live in El Paso, Texas. Ray is an electrical engineer working for the El Paso electric department. And Melanie had been for many years a neonatal nurse. And neonatal nurse deals with babies. And she had seen a lot of deformed babies in her time. And she knew a lot about deformity. So that couple assumed, well, Melanie wouldn't have any emotional hang-ups about the deformed child skull. And when they asked Ray and Melanie if they would take this in, yes, sure, no problem. Bring them over. So when they brought them, Melanie, picked up what they thought was deformed one, and she knew right away, this is not a typical deformity. This is what they saw. It was too light by far, and it was too symmetrical, very symmetrical, and that's not what deformity is generally about. It's asymmetrical. It's not smooth. It's not put together well. So when they looked at it, they also noticed they just happened to be, coincidentally, members of El Paso's MUFON organization, Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, which has chapters in major cities all over the country. So, just coincidence, it fell into the right hands. Melanie knew it wasn't a typical deformity, and she and Ray both knew about UFOs and aliens, and they looked at each other and they said, this skull could fit perfectly in the head of a gray. Because to them, it had all the hallmarks. You can see the beginnings of the little crease up here, but it has that crease on the top of the head. You know, you hear grays have a heart-shaped face. They have a crease in the middle, they have two bulges out here, and then they come down to a very sharp pointed small lower face. And that's what Melanie could see this thing had. And she said, geez, Ray, I think this could be the skull of a gray. And he agreed. And so she said, I want to know. And so they put the word out at MUFON, and they said, who in the field of alternative knowledge knows more about skulls than anybody else? And my name came up because of my previous work with human origins and hominoids, which is the book Everything You Know Is Wrong. And that had put me on the map, and everybody knew by then who I was, and they said, you should try Lloyd Pye. And I was in Louisiana, and they were in Texas, quite a distance away. So they said, next time you're in the El Paso area, stop by, we have something to show you. Which I assumed was going to be about something to do with Bigfoot or hominoids, because that's what I was into. I had no experience in UFOs and aliens. That wasn't my field. I was, a novice in that. So on February 18th, 1999, this is what they showed me. And I had the same experience that they did. I did know enough about skulls to know this was a very weird skull. It was too light. It weighs half as much as a normal human skull, as you will see when you hold the copies later. It's very, very unusual. The bone is half as thick as it ought to be. You can see that just kind of looking around in it. Just you can see right here how thin it is. Very, very unusual. But mostly my father was an optometrist, and I knew about eyes, and I could see those eye sockets were very strange. So I was sold. I said, I'm very confident that this is some kind of human deformity, but I don't have any idea what it is, and I think it's close enough to a gray skull that we really need to be sure. And they said, will you take it out and find out what it is? And I said, sure. I'll take it out. Scientists will be jumping all over each other when they see how weird this thing is. We'll probably have this taken care of in about 6 months. I'm talking to you 10 years and 4 months later, which shows you how much I know about anything. A gross overestimation of the interest in science to get involved in things that represent huge leaps forward. What I've learned over those years is that science very much will accept very tiny incremental moves forward. But anything that represents a big jump, they will fight back tooth and nail. They will not let that happen if they can avoid it. None of them want big jumps on their watch. They don't care if it's after they retire, but they don't want it happening while they're in charge, because it makes them all look bad. So I was in for a dogfight that I didn't know was coming, because again, I didn't really know that field. All right, this shows the maxilla in place, so you get an idea of the nasal passage, the two teeth that were visible in, and where it would have fit in the nose and all that. And this staining, by the way, is just staining from the dirt that it was buried in, just coincidental. All right, so I took it from El Paso and I started taking it to experts with the idea that I was going to have no trouble getting them excited about it. And probably 1 in 10 would tell me anything at all. Most of them that I would take it to would say, it's cradle boarded hydrocephalic, get that thing out of here. It's just simple, forget about it, routine, we see these all the time, no big deal. Blatantly lying, just trying to get rid of me. So it was a real problem at first. Now we'll talk about cradle boarding and hydrocephaly, but even so, I did learn. that I did get experts to share with me their knowledge, and now I'm going to share with you the physiological differences that they began to point out to me, the physiological aspects of it that I didn't really know and understand. The first is just the standard front view that you saw a minute ago, but let's look at the zygomatic arches, the cheekbones, and see how it works in human. The bone wraps around, as you see, the cheekbone through here, so that it folds in. If you were to rip it out, you'd be missing this part right here. See that design? But if you see in the Star Child, it's a different design. They both broke off very clean. So right away, you've got something significantly different in the way the Star Child's eye sockets are built. Also, human eye sockets are really deep. They go that far, fully 2 inches. My finger would go in your eye sockets if they weren't there, that deep. And at the very back would be your optic nerve and your optic foramens, which are the openings where the nerve and vessels come in to control the movement of your eye. Okay? You see in the Star Child, it's very, very shallow, not even to one joint, not even an inch. And the foramens have been moved down here to the front and out. So if it has eyes at all, they're centered down here rather than up here. A very different eye. And the eye is very shallow, so if it had eyeballs the size of ours, they're sticking off like a frog eye. And that's not a good design for a little kid. Any of you know kids? You know, they're coming out at age 3 or 4 when they're playing with their friends. They're not keeping those eyes. So it's a bad design. So they have to have other eyes, flatter, different somehow, but we don't know how. You can feel right in here in the skull copy that you'll feel how round it is and how sharp that is. It's a different design. We're starting to stack up differences that I want you to listen to, because all of these are genetic differences. These are different genetic instructions creating this. But somehow everything is folding in right to make a functioning human. Normally, human beings born with one deformity, not a problem, they're in good shape. Born with 2, they're in a problem, they got a little problem. 3, you're beginning to have real problems. 4 or 5, you're dead. You're toast. Forget about it. This thing is nothing but deformities, but they're all wrapped in and somehow they function. It's very, very different. This is a close-up of the eye sockets. When you look at the eye sockets of the Star Child, when we have it back there, you will not be able to see any shift at all in the terrain of the bone. You will not be able to see it. Your eyes will not pick it up. But if you put your finger right here and drag it through here, you can see the spots of people that did it. Right here to right here, there's a hump right in here. Right here to right here, there's a hump right in here. They're absolutely equal. They're so subtle you can't see them, and they're there. They are perfectly, perfectly, perfectly symmetrical, these eye sockets. That is not, I assure you, that is not deformity. That is genes telling it to grow completely different than human beings. Okay, this is a profile shot. I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it's important. You see all the different parts of the skull, the parietals, the temporals, the frontal bone. Anyway, what I want to point out is that the human, for whatever else she had going for her, and we know that it's a female, later tested, so I'm just going to call it her from now on. We know that she had suffered a concussion at some point in her life, and a pretty serious one, and had recovered from it. For what that might be worth. No concussions in the Star Child at all, very healthy. This is called the pterygoid plate, and this is important to know. People look at this on the Star Child and the Star Child copy, and they say, what's that funny bone sticking out? It's called a pterygoid plate. What does it do? It's a bracing bone. You see how this one here braces the maxilla up, you know? It is strictly designed to do one thing. When you take a real sharp shot in the grill like that, you don't want this part of your face caving in and crashing into your neck and killing you. It just holds your mouth out so that you can take hard shots in the face and not die from it. That's what the pterygoid plate does. But look how small it is relative to the human. It's half or less, meaning it's got a much smaller lower face, and there's many signs of how small the lower face of this skull is. You see the ear hole, the mastoid, the bone back behind your ear, just sort of getting the landscape here. Notice the nose. All humans have a brow ridge, and then they have a dip down in the beginning of their nose. We all do, even if we have noses the size of mine. Okay? We are all going to have that. Notice the star child. No brow ridges, and its nose goes straight down. A completely different design in here as well. Even something as simple as that, different. You can't find a corollary that's exactly the same in the star child and a human. Now, the Indian, this is important. Remember we talked about the cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, where experts will continually, you can go on the internet and you can see criticism of the star child as scientists say, doctors say, experts say it's a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, and they just want you to just blow it off the way they wanted me to. Yet, a moron can see that it's neither cradle-boarded nor hydrocephalic, and I will explain why. This skull truly is cradle-boarded. It was very common in primitive societies a long time ago, and is common to this day in some primitive societies. Now, what is it? First, you need to know that the skulls have been carbon dated to 900 years ago. So they died together 900 years ago. They were carbon dated independently, different labs, different years. No question, 900 years ago they died, and they died together, in the sense that they died at the same time. So the story holds up. So back then, 900 years ago, cradle boarding in Mexico, in Mesoamerica, all over Mesoamerica, was common. Why? What is cradle boarding? Cradle boarding is the need for mothers in primitive societies to carry their babies on their backs to go back to work as soon after birth as possible. And when you do that, your baby its neck is not going to hold up. Its head is the biggest part of its body, almost, and its neck is very weak. And so if the woman does a lot of like this, the baby's head's going to do like this. Can't have that. So they strap it onto a board. They swaddle it, and they tie its head down so its head can't move. In doing that, they're not doing it to reshape the head or do anything, just want to hold the head still. But a baby's bones are so soft, especially its head bones, that they will take any shape at all that you apply to them. So the back of the head becomes as flat as the table, as flat as any board, as flat as the board that it's put on. Understand? And the head of this skull is indeed as flat as that. You rub your hand on it, it's just absolutely flat. But the flattening always goes vertically from the crown down to the inion, to this knot back here in the back of your head. Now, when everybody here, reach around to about right here on your head, find your own inion. Everybody has that. Every human being has that. With me? Every chimp has that. Every gorilla has that. Every monkey has that. If you've got a head sticking on a neck, you've got a form of that, where your neck connects to your head. The board of the cradle board can't go past that because it would gouge out the muscles of the neck. But now you look at Star Child, which I'll explain the name in a minute. You look at this one, it goes way beyond that point, and not only that, you can see there's a dent here. It's missing. It has no inion at all. It's got a little circle that's dented, that's scooped out. Exactly the opposite of what it ought to have. Again, a very big difference. So it goes all the way down right to the neck opening, but as you can see, it's convoluted. It's not flat. It's got its natural convolutions, and you can feel them with your hand very easily when you feel the copy. It was not cradle boarded, and again, a moron can see that. Certainly those experts who insist that it's cradle boarded know better. But they believe in what's called Occam's razor, which is that the simplest answer is usually the correct one. And whenever they're stumped and they're up against something, they go skirting around Occam's razor and say, here's the simplest explanation we can think of, and that must be right. And the simplest explanation is somehow it got flattened manually, which is obviously not true. All right, now we're going to look at a cradle board so that if you have any doubt about what I was describing, this is it. Now, this is kind of a Cadillac of cradle boards. This is a very modern one, but nonetheless, you get the idea, and here's the head strap. This is just standard American Indian cradle board. You with it? I want you to understand that. Now, let's talk about hydrocephaly for a minute. Hydrocephaly is water on the brain or water in the brain. When your spinal fluid, the valves that allow the movement of spinal fluid in and out of the brain do not work, faulty, whatever, what happens is the fluid comes up and it can't drain out. So the pressure just begins to build. And your head begins to expand. And it can get pretty big before you die, but eventually what happens is the pressure forces your brain out of your neck hole because it's soft and it'll go, and then you die because your cerebellum, parts of your cerebellum go out, and eventually you die. Kills you. 900 years ago. Now today, they're able to fix that. They put shunts in, and kids that are born that way can go right on. Not a problem. Not a problem. But back then, 900 years ago, you were toast if you were born with that. Okay? Now, here's what some of them look like, just so you can see. The pressure goes out in all directions and can create some strange shapes, but it doesn't change your eye sockets. It doesn't take away your inion. It doesn't stop your neck from being where a human neck is. It doesn't change fundamentally the fact that you were going to be a human if this had not happened. It certainly doesn't create the changes that are evident in the star child. But most importantly, what it doesn't do is it doesn't leave a dent in the top of the head. Because why? The pressure is uniform in all directions. And the skull bulges where it's weak, where it's thin. It could not possibly leave a dent like this unless that was a prematurely closed suture. And you know what sutures are. These are suture lines right here. And if you don't know, I'll explain real quickly. When you're born, these are not fully developed. These are like this much and this much and this much, and the rest of the middle part is ligaments, so that your head can form itself into a tube to pass out the birth canal. You all with me on that? And then over the course of the next 2-3 years, they fuse, the bones go together, and the last one to close is this one right up here at the top where 3 come together, and it's the soft spot on the baby's head. All right? You with me on this? So, we see that if this is fused, it would keep it from expanding. But we'll see later that we found out that it wasn't. It's not fused at all. Open and healthy at the time of death. This is, again, genes telling it to grow this way. And again, a moron can see that that is not the result of hydrocephaly. It's just cowards trying to get out of dealing with something that scares the heck out of them. Really about it. Okay? So, what I want you to see here, too, is a couple of things. You see, people look at these and they say, well, what are these? What are these? Those are called wormian bones or islands. The way it is one side will generally suture up ahead of the other one, and so the other one will fill in like that to seal it off. Very common, routine, not a problem. And the other thing I want you to see is the missing inion. Now this is where the inion is for the human, and these are the attachment points for the muscles. You see how clear they are. This is where it should be here, but you see the attachment points are way down, very near the neck opening, and you see the extreme flattening here. It's like taking it by this part and just stretching it up and flattening it out. With me? Okay. Now this shows the convolutions. Remember I said you could feel them, you can see them. The convolutions are there. Not cradle boarded. Not cradle boarded. This is the top view, and again, this is where the soft spot was I was just talking about, right here, right here. And again, you see a real clear shot of the dent or the crease or whatever you want to call it. Unmistakable. Unmistakable. And you'll see it when you see the copies. Here's from the underside. Now let's get ourselves some landmarks here so we know what we're looking at. This is just the underside of a normal human skull. This is the broken zygomatic arch cheekbone that I told you about. It will connect here. You see that these are both broken off. They would connect up to here, be much flatter, of course. But there they are. The important thing to notice here is that, number one, these are the exact same size, so it's perfectly normal. This one is. And this is called the basilar part. The basilar part. Now, it's missing in the star child. The basilar part is one of the last parts of the bones in your skull to fuse. It fuses between the ages of 20 and 25. 20 and 25. So this could mean that the star child died before the age of 20. In which case, the basilar part would have just fallen out. Or it could be that it was fused, but in the shot that took all this out, whatever it bumped into that caused all this to get knocked away, that could have gotten knocked away as well. So we don't know the age at which it died. You can't tell. This is the necks of the two, the neck comparison. Now notice the difference, how much bigger the human neck is from the star child, the flattening and the shrinking. It's about half the size of a normal human neck, half the size. Very, to me, impressive. Now this is the attachments of the neck in the rear, the inion, the fossa where the neck muscles attach for the star child, and this is the spread so that you can compare them and see the difference, inion and where the inion should be. Very, very different, very significant. All right, this is a look at the zygomatic arches of the human conclusion based on this one and what the star childs have to be. Like that. You see what a difference. This is where your chewing muscles go up through. You could put I could put my 2 fingers up through that. They'll fit, 2 fingers. You could probably get a couple of drinking straws through here, good-sized drinking straws. So obviously you're looking again at evidence of a much smaller lower face. Much smaller lower face. Now the balance points. Very interesting. When you're looking at the two, they have different balance points completely. A human balance point is a little bit back of center by about 1 inch to 1.5 inches from the exact center point under the skull. Why? Because the front of your face is hollow. The front of your face is hollow. You have a big sinus sticking up here, your frontal sinus. You have those deep eye sockets. You have your nasal passage. You have your mouth. And all of this is brain. So it's a fat kid and a light kid on a seesaw. You've got to move the fulcrum back a little bit to make it work. But with the star child, it doesn't have that. As you'll see, it doesn't have any sinuses, not at all. It has those very shallow eye sockets. We're not sure about the nose. We know the mouth is very small. So it's all brain. So it's been redesigned somehow. Nature knew that in this combination of, quote, deformities it was creating, it had to fix it so that the neck would go forward until it's dead center under the mass of the cranium, so that it's balanced front and back and side to side, like a weird-shaped golf ball on a little bit of golf tee. You know, if nature's going to create a deformity, how could it do it so absolutely perfectly as this? It's ridiculous to say that, to assume that. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that the two skulls are exactly the same size volume-wise. They would fit in a 13 cubic centimeter box perfectly, both of them. Okay? So, they're small as humans go. The person that was found lying on her back in that mine tunnel was about 5 feet tall based on the size of this skull. 5 feet tall is a very common size for Mesoamericans of that era and of today. Go to Mexico today, most of them are in that range. Very small people. Not all, but on average, very short people, 5 feet would be average. The girl, when she found him, she said the one in the grave was significantly smaller, significantly shorter. So we assume that's about 4 feet tall. It would have to be for her to be able to notice that it was that much shorter. So let's assume around 4 feet tall. And yet, the skulls are the same volume. Should have the same volume of brain. If you had our skulls in here, they'd be a little bit larger. Now, what are the numbers? Here they are. This skull holds 1,200 cubic centimeters of flaxseed. And that's about right for a standard 12-year-old or for a 5 foot tall adult. About 1,200 cubic centimeters. You with me? If our skulls were here, average everybody in this room, it'd be about 1,400 cubic centimeters, 200 cubic centimeters more. Right? Star child, which should be 1,200 cubic centimeters, is 1,600 cubic centimeters. 400 more than this, fully 1/3 more. Now, where does it all fit? Well, the thinness of the bone is going to account for some. The lack of the sinuses is going to account for some. The shallow eye sockets. But not enough, because you have this bulge here. Yes, you do, relative to that. But you also have all of that missing. It should balance out. We still, to this day, don't quite really understand where does all that brain fit. A lot of extra brain. Not only is a lot of extra brain, it may be different kind of brain. Let me tell you why. This here is the cerebellum of any standard human. It is the most important part of your brain. 80% of the neurons are in it, but it's only like 10% of your brain. Yet 80% of your neurons are there. What are your neurons? 1 million of your neurons make up your optic nerve. This is everything that you are, everything that you do when you're not thinking about it. This is what you think with, this is what you live with, this is your software. This is what makes you breathe, what makes your heart beat, what makes your blood do, what makes your everything go, the instructions come out of here. We are complicated. Complicated. This is it. You let anything happen to squeeze that out the hole, which is what happens with hydrocephaly, you are dead, remember? You got to take care of this thing if you take care of anything. And so it's cupped in this rear part of your head, and it's got all this muscle back here protecting it on top of that. Brain, remember that muscle's going from here and wrapping around. It is well protected, because it has to be. And then on the inside, you have these flanges of bone, these flares of bone on the inside that support it. Why? Because it's got 3 pounds of brain matter sitting on it for the course of your life. It's got to hold up. It's got to see you into old age. So, with the star child, we have a completely different situation. We have a cerebellum with a shape obviously like this, if it's going to fit in this narrow little area that it has, and it's got all that extra brain back here, plus all of this pressing right down on it on a much narrower space, and guess what? Stick your finger in it and you feel those flanges greatly reduced. It doesn't have a lot of support here. So it's pressing right out of the neck hole. You can see it. This is pressing right down into bone. This is pressing right out of the neck hole like down a slipper slide. That brain should be pouring out of that neck hole. When the brain specialist that explained all this to me saw it and understood it, he said, you know, I think this thing has a completely different brain than we have. It must. It either doesn't have a cerebellum of the kind we have, or the material that makes it up must be a lot harder than our brain, because our brain would go squeezing right out if it was made of the same material. So we may be looking at a very different brain here, and this is fairly strong evidence of that. This is the chewing muscles. Remember I told you that they come up through the zygomatic arch and spread out. You can see the line. On the real ones it's very clear. You can see the line here. See how much reduced it is? Again, very small lower face. Very small lower face. This is the surface of the bone. Now you see these little dimples here? These are very common, very routine. You know the story about every 7 years, everything but your brain changes out. Every 7 years, you're a new person. Your cells are changing all the time. This is part of that process. Some of these holes account for cells going in and going away and being destroyed. Other of these holes are cells, new cells coming up to replace the old ones that are gone. It's just part of the routine, nothing odd about it. But notice, they're missing here. They're missing in the star child. Now again, if you're going to be a deformity, why take that out? Are you beginning to see how deformity doesn't really stack up here? Obviously you are. This is incredible stuff. Now, the right maxilla fragment. This is a close-up of it. Don't worry about the purple stuff. It was stuff that we jammed in it when we were making a mold of it. But this is what it looked like. And as you see, look how small. 1 inch. There may have been more here. Looks like there was. So it would have been a little more than 1 inch. But the roof is flat. The roof is just flat instead of arched. So what does that indicate? A small tongue, or maybe no tongue. Or maybe no tongue. Now, look at where we are here relative to this. We've got a very big brain, and we've got no sinuses. Do you know what your sinuses are good for? Besides giving you a lot of problems when you get sick? You would think, as I thought, that they have some function with cleaning your, cleaning the air when you breathe, or warming it, or doing something. But you know what they really do, what your sinuses do? They allow your voice to resonate. They allow you to talk the way I'm talking to you. Because if I didn't have any sinuses,
My voice would sound like this. I would sound more like a robot than the way I talk.
I know, isn't that weird? So, you've got this massive brain, you've got no sinuses, you've got a very thin neck, and you've got a small or maybe no tongue. What is this beginning to indicate? Maybe it doesn't talk. Maybe it communicates telepathically. No evidence for that, but it's an interesting combination of disorders, isn't it? Because everybody says that grays communicate with them telepathically. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so in looking at this, not only did we get advice from people, this is all the physiology, we did testing. At the same time, we were doing tests. And one of the first tests we did was an x-ray exam of the skull to see, what it was all about. And one of the first things we found is that there were teeth in that upper bone of the maxilla waiting to come down. So you had the two teeth. Now in this x-ray, one of the teeth is gone, but this is a better x-ray than the first one, so that's why I use it, so you can see them so clearly. But when we had the first x-ray done, the technician said, oh, well, you got two teeth down, you got several teeth up in the top, that's a child. Got to be a child, 5, 6 years old, no problem. This was an x-ray technician telling us this. And so I said, okay, well, all right, it's a child. And so we thought it was cool and we named it the Star Child. Big mistake, huge mistake, colossal mistake. Because not only is it not a child, but scientists began to immediately say, oh, well, you've already made assumptions about this thing. You think that it's an alien. We don't want to have anything to do with it. We have nothing to do with aliens and UFOs. I don't know what we could have called it, but from the time we called it the Star Child, it stuck. And by the time we realized that I realized we made a really big mistake, it's too late. It was known as the Star Child. So, we're stuck with that name, even though it isn't a child, and we'll see why. Because the teeth are so well worn. Now this is the human. You can see how flat they are. They're worn down like horse teeth. And the reason is that 900 years ago, people were eating corn-based meals where they're grinding corn on stone, mortar and pestles, and getting grit in it and grinding the teeth flat. All right? So, same thing you see here. You see chipping of the enamel very clearly, pieces gone. You see what's called crazing. You see this dark line here, this dark line here, but you also see a whiter line here and a white line here. Crazing is the cracking of the tooth enamel from chewing really hard things. Like cracking walnuts with your teeth or chewing a lot of ice, really hard ice. You have to generate a lot of torque and a lot of energy to craze your teeth. And you can tell when you've done it in life because as you eat more, darkness gets in and juices and things and stains them. But also when you die, dehydration can cause crazing as well, cracking. And the white ones without food to stain them are the ones that are post-mortem crazing. So it's pretty clear to see the difference. So the teeth had absorbed too much punishment to be a child's teeth just looking at that. And then later, we pulled out the rear tooth, and we saw that it had huge, massive roots, as you'll see in a minute. And as you know, when children lose their teeth, their roots are absorbed, which is why their teeth can come out. They don't have roots. So it's clear that it was a very mature adult at whatever age. This is the x-ray of the sinuses that I just mentioned to you that are missing. And as you see, here's the sinuses in a human, right here, the eye sockets. And they look kind of like a cauliflower back here. But you see they take up a pretty good bit of room. Not so much as a shred of a vestige in the Star Child. And it's a very different look in here too, as you can see. Very different look. But no sinuses at all, not even malformed. Nothing. Very different. Profile, and as you see very clearly, you can see now the flatness of the cradle-boarded head of the human. But the real key here is to look at these white tracks here. These are the veins that are on your brain that as you grow, your bones are so soft, they press up in and they leave tracks so that when you get x-rays and the brain is gone, the track marks of the veins are still in the bone, embedded in the bone. You can see it. And you see the same thing in the star child, no problem, except they've been shifted a little bit because of all this excess swelling in the parietals. But nonetheless, perfectly normal all the way around. And you see again the ridging of the nose here, the brow ridge, you see it very clearly, brow ridge, dip. No brow ridge, no dip. Completely redesigned here. This is the underside, kind of an interesting monster looking face here, but you see the same size basically, but you also see the convolutions very clearly. Now this is a CAT scan. Remember I told you we needed to have a CAT scan to make sure that there wasn't fusion in that upper suture? Well, a CAT scan is just digital slices like this, and then you repeat them and you come through and you start right here and you work your way through and you see that the sutures are open, just no problem. Totally normal at the time of death, totally normal at the time of death. But when the guy got here, he says, holy smokes, look at this. Those inner ears, man. I said, what? He said, they're twice the size that they ought to be. Twice the size. Now, our inner ears are a balance mechanism, folks, if you don't know that. They help you maintain your balance, right? So, what would this star child need such big inner ears for? Assuming that it has a balance mechanism the way we have. Well, it's got that much bigger head on a much thinner neck. Maybe that. Or maybe it is from a much higher gravity place, or, you can speculate a lot of ways. But just understand, it's got very different inner ears than what we have. Now, this is really interesting. Human bone composition as recorded by a scanning electron microscope. This is the human, and this is very standard. Carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, calcium, and then all the other ones, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, sulfur. And no problem. This is normal. This is the normal bone signature of the human and of you and me and everybody on this earth. Except the star child. This is it. Look at the difference. Big jump in carbon and oxygen. You know what this is? It's more like tooth enamel. It's very hard. Its bone signature is more like tooth enamel than actual bone. This is chemistry, folks. Chemistry. The whole chemistry of the thing has changed. All of this is pretty big news. In fact, science should be jumping all over this. Why? Because all of those big chemical companies out there and those genetic companies out there could make billions if they could figure out what made the star child do this, and you could come up with a pill or a shot or something to add durability to human bones. I'm the leading edge of the baby boom. My generation that's coming and everything behind me, we could use something like this in a big way. Imagine the money to be made here. Now, is anybody that in this business interested in this? No, they're not. Because this has to do with aliens and UFOs, and they know. They absolutely know without a single person telling them anything different and without making any effort whatsoever to find out the facts. They know that if this was true, if everything I was saying here to you today was true, they'd already know about it. Because science would have told them, media would have told them, they'd already know about it. And this is what I go up against all the time. Well, if this were true, why don't I know about it? Well, because you're a moron, stupid. You don't take the trouble to look into things that fly against what you already know. You think you know. Oh, look, you want to punch him. It's so frustrating. So frustrating. But anyway, not only is it an issue of this, everything that you've seen up to now, absolutely everything that I've shown you, all of these physiological differences mean absolutely nothing to science. They mean as little as this does. They don't care how much money's involved. They don't care what. because it goes against what they are allowed to believe, not just what they believe, but what they are allowed to believe, because they know the difference. Don't think that these people that I show this to or have shown it to in the past don't look at me and say, "Nah, don't want nothing to do with it, get out of here," do whatever they can to get rid of me. Don't think they don't go home to their wives or their significant others or whatever and say, "Honey, you won't believe what I saw today." But they can't say that to me because they know they're not allowed to do that. That if they step off the path that far to actually take UFOs and aliens serious when they know they are not supposed to do that, they will be in trouble. They will be excommunicated from the club. They just don't risk it. And you know what? If I was in their shoes, I wouldn't either. I'd have a wife, I'd have kids, I'd have a mortgage, I'd have all that stuff that they have to think about. You understand? It's business. It's business. And they play the game to win. So that's what I'm up against. One guy said to me one time, as I was going through the litany, he says, wait a minute, Lloyd, I don't care if you stack up 10,000 of those things, of those differences. It doesn't matter. I have an answer for everything you can throw at me, which is that nature can do anything. Nature can do anything. It's absolutely no different than fundamentalist Christians or any other saying, God can do anything. Throw anything at me, I don't care, God can do anything. I'm invulnerable, I can't be beat, God can't be beat. Science just absolutely balances that off with nature. Nature can do anything, can handle anything you can throw at it. You will not win on this kind of information. There's only one thing you can win at. There's only one thing we respect, which is DNA. You show me some DNA evidence, I'll be impressed. Why? Because DNA is math. DNA is math turned into biology. Simple as that. Math turned into biology, biology turned into math. It is always the same, and it is chillingly precise. It puts you on death row, it gets you off death row. DNA works, and they respect it. It is their tool, is one of their main number one tools. And you've got to have a DNA answer. In 1999, in late 1999, when I had done all of this that you're seeing here, and come up with this, we don't care, you can stack these up 10,000 high, show us some DNA evidence. There were 6 labs in the world that could recover ancient DNA. Now you need to understand the difference. Over 50 years is considered ancient. Under 50 years, not. You need a pregnancy test, you want to know who the father is, you do whatever, you need any kind, you need a murder case worked on, no problem, the DNA is fresh, easy to recover, no problem. Over 50 years requires a whole different set of handling. Makes a clean room look like a pigsty. You can't have a breath of the researcher, a droplet of their breath fall into the solution. You can't have a flake of their skin, a shard of anything off of any other human into that that's contaminated. You got to really work it hard to be a good lab for recovering ancient DNA. There were only 6 at the end of 1999 when I started looking for help. And absolutely none of them would have anything to do with a thing called the star child. I don't care how much money you have. We will not do this. This is embarrassing. This would cheapen what we do. Couldn't get anybody to help. So a friend in Canada said, I've got a friend up here who runs a forensic lab at the University of Vancouver, British Columbia, a forensic lab for doing younger than 50-year DNA. But who knows, maybe they'll get something, especially if your DNA is well preserved, as it should be if it was in a mine tunnel for 900 years. That's like being in a climate-controlled storage locker. Should be in good shape. So let's give it a shot. The price was right. It's about $8,000, so we took a shot. Gambled. Huge, huge, huge mistake. Should have waited. Didn't. Got anxious and pushed the envelope too hard, and the envelope broke. I got on the radio. I asked for help, asked for the money. had to do the testing, people donated. Everybody was aware of it. Going to find out what the Star Child is. Let's find out what the Star Child is. Sent it to the lab, and this is what happened. We gave him the occipital condyles first, these parts in here, and on the Star Child, on the first attempt of the human, easy recovery of its nuclear DNA, it was a human, no question, easy recovery. But of the Star Child, and all they were attempting to recover is nuclear DNA, and we'll talk about that later, not mitochondrial, just nuclear, no recovery. Oh, we must have contaminated the solution, no recovery. Give us another piece of bone. So we did, we gave him this. And, excuse me, in the second one they said, we have a recovery, but it's kind of weak. It's 200 picograms, when the minimum threshold should be 1,000 picograms. But those 200 picograms are so clear, we are confident, we're absolutely sure it is an XY, it is a male, it is a human, pack up and go home. Now remember, we paid for this one. This was out of their pocket. So, it's like, are you sure? You blew the first one, are you sure? 200 picograms, that's 1/5 of what you need, are you sure? We're sure. Male, human, forget about it. Go home. Over, done. I said, I'd like another one. Would you do it? I don't trust that. I think you owe us a third one. And so they said, they tore the tooth out and crushed it up, and the same exact result. 200 picograms of the 1,000 they needed, XY, and here you go. Now, I had to go on the radio and go on my website and everything else and hand in this guy's report. This is just a small part of it. Saying the Star Child was human, forget about it. And you know what? People were glad. Even in the field of alternative knowledge, people like you were glad to have it over with. Because when you come right down to it, the idea that this thing could really be human was very scary for a lot of people. And so I was done for at the end of '99. And from February to November, when this came in and I had to announce it at the end of '99, I was done for. We have a term in the deep south where I'm from. I was a blowed up peckerwood. I was a blowed up peckerwood. Couldn't do anything, couldn't get anybody to listen, couldn't get anybody to take it serious. When I kept saying, I think they made a mistake, I think there's something wrong here, I had a bad feeling, I had a bad vibe. Didn't matter. Didn't matter. So for the next 3 years, all of 2000, all of 2001, all of 2002, I flogged this thing as best I could. I could hardly get people to listen to me. They wouldn't invite me to major conferences anymore. They wouldn't let me go on the radio to talk about it. That's old news. That's been done. Nobody's interested. Star Child's dead. $50,000 on my credit cards and I'm ready to go bankrupt at the end of 2002. And so I put the word out. I tell my girlfriend at the time, I'm done, I can't go anymore, this is over, I can't go anymore. I have to go back to who I was. I have to go back to hominoids and human origins, because that's the only way people will listen to me if I quit talking about the Star Child. And so I sent out a letter at the end of the year saying that at the first of the year, at the first of 2003, I am quitting. I am giving up. I'm handing the Star Child back to its owners. They can do with it what they want. But everybody wants to believe that it's a human. Go ahead and believe that. I'm done. I was a blowed up peckerwood. And then, a miracle occurred. Now, we're going to take a break. Find out what